So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session for the course Startup School of Schools. This is a course created by TechHub Riga together with the Investment and Development Agency of Latvia to give you knowledge on how to grow your early stage startup, how to move forward with it. And yeah, my name is Paul Silinch. As with every other session, I'm going to be here with you from the beginning till the end and moderate it. A couple of technical things, as usual, if you're joining live, please turn on your camera if you can. If you cannot, that is also completely understandable. I know that some of you are outside playing in the snow, so that's okay if you don't turn on the camera. But yeah, also if there are any technical difficulties with your camera, then it's also okay. But it's always better for me or the lecturers to see whom we are talking to. And of course, regarding the questions, as always, you can either use the chat right here on Zoom to ask them, or you can also raise the virtual hand to ask them verbally. Another thing I'd like to mention already regarding the questions is that our lecturer today, she is open to the fact that you ask them mid-talk. So basically, whenever you come up with a question at any point during the talk or during the Q&A part, feel free to type it in the chat or raise your virtual hand, and I will give you, or we will give you the floor. So why are we here today? What are we focusing on during the fourth session? It is managing burn rate. We will try to look into the calculating and analyzing your burn rate. But mostly it's going to be told from a personal experience, not so much theory and, the actual formulas, X types this is that, times that is. Yeah, so let's hear about managing burn rates. So without further ado, I would love to give the floor over to Gwen Sandberg, Investment Director at InVenture. Gwen, the stage is yours.
Great.
So to say.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Great to see you, even though it's just a face and in some cases a name. My name is Gwen Sandberg and I'm with InVenture. And it's a real honor to chat to you today about sort of the world of venture and burn rate. So I'm going to prepare my screen. And then start sharing.
Full screen, perfect.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to assume that it's full screen for everyone and everyone is able to see it. If not, just scream because I might not be able to see you. And then just as Paul said, don't hesitate to interrupt. It's quite boring to have a long monologue. And so if there's any concepts that you want to dig into a little bit or, aren't fully explained, then, just interrupt. And a lot of this is based on what I've learned about the venture world, just to kind of set the stage here a bit. So a lot of this is based on opinion. And so a lot of these concepts and how to approach them and how to deal with them are people's opinions. And really nothing more than that. But that's also the world of venture. There's different ways to look at things. There's different scenarios where, something that we said might not necessarily fit. So there's different grades of everything that we kind of talk about. So I'll try to, as I go through the different concepts, give a context of, when certain concepts are more or less relevant than others. Okay. So yeah, I work for the venture capital company InVenture. Before we get into them, I can just share a little bit about myself. My name is Gwen. I'm originally from Texas, from the US. I've been in Stockholm, Sweden now on and off for the past 20 years. I have worked at a bunch of different tech companies all over the world for the past 20 years. Always working for the sort of the challenger, a company coming in and trying to change up the current state of things. I think the most recent experience that's relevant to the conversations today. So I worked for an e-commerce startup a long time ago, here based out of Stockholm. The first thing that we did when I got started was take the company down from 75 to 25 people because we were burning too much money. So that was a great opportunity. The first start in sort of venture was for a venture that didn't work out so well. Then I went over to Google and was at Google for a couple of years working out of Ireland, really and sort of an MBA on steroids, where you learn a whole lot and work side by side with super inspirational people. And then most recently, I worked for the Swedish fintech startup Tink, where I was early in. And in 5 years, Tink went from, very negligible revenue, if any at all, to being sold to the credit card company Visa earlier this year for $2.2 billion. So that was quite a journey. And another one that I think is relevant for today and gives some good examples of how things can be done. So that's my background. And then I joined in venture after Tink was sold to Visa. So I've been in venture for the past 7 months. So not that long, but I have been in the world and in the realm and seen things from both sides of the tables for quite a long time. A little bit about InVenture. We really strive to be your most trusted early stage investor, which means that we're here for you. Even when there's nothing more than maybe yourself and a co-founder and an idea and a market segment that you want to capitalize on. And so we can invest super early. We are a generalist fund, which means that we don't focus on a very specific vertical. We have a couple of legs that we kind of stand on, but when you put those together, it really consists of almost everything. And so those legs would be consumer fairness, which is B2C companies, democratize knowledge, include more people in the financial world, which is fintech, healthcare and well-being, sustainable resources, which is where you get sort of the climate tech, and then new and enabling technologies, which is a lot of times some of the deep tech work that we do. And then below is a long list of the different companies that we have backed.
Is it just me or has it frozen for others as well?
Yeah, it's frozen.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, let's give it a moment. There is a huge snowstorm in Stockholm, so it might be because of that. Let's give it just a, I don't know, couple of seconds. I hope the internet returns there. Meanwhile, I might write to her. Just let her know what's happened. Oh, we suddenly lost her. Okay. So, any questions so far? You can prepare the questions. And meanwhile, I can also let you know, I hope she will return in a moment. Meanwhile, I think we can, I can tell you a bit about the next session, which is going to be on legal aspects. I plan to say this at the end, but if we have this moment, then. So yeah, during the legal aspects, we will cover such topics as intellectual property and employee agreements and so on and so forth. But one thing that our lecturers for that session, they asked if it would be possible, of course, if you have any, that is, but if it would be possible that the audience, the participants, kind of already prepare some questions and send them in beforehand. Basically, if you have any questions about agreements or intellectual property or so on, it would be great if you could send them as a direct message to me on Slack or via email, preferably during this week. And then I'm going to forward them to the lecturers of next week's legal aspect session, because yeah, that way they would know better how to prepare, what to include, what not to include in the session and the slides. So yeah, that's regarding that. Meanwhile, yeah, I've mentioned that. Okay, still see she hasn't returned yet. I'm going to pause the recording for a moment and I'm going to quickly write a message to her, if that's okay with you. You can use the opportunity to just chat amongst yourselves. Gwen, do we hear you? Do we see you? We see you. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to
Got me.
replace. What was it? Internet, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, I think so. We sit at the co-working place Norrsken here in Stockholm, and it kind of happens a lot.
Okay, let's have. It's okay.
Better.
As long as you return, that's all we need.
There. Okay.
Yep,
Great. But I heard when you. I think I've got a good understanding of when I dropped off. So I'll keep on moving to keep this moving forward. So InVenture has, we're on our fourth fund. We just closed it at 150 million euros, which makes us the largest seed investor in the Nordics and the Baltics. So we only deploy cash in the Nordics and the Baltics, which is fantastic for all of you and all of us as well, because then we get to work super close to our home market. One of the biggest success stories that we've had is a company called Volt, which we were super early in. They were nothing more than a 6-person team, and we recently exited to DoorDash. So 87% of our portfolio, we backed them after the first round, which is a fantastic number. It means that we're sticking there with our companies. 50% of them have raised a Series A, which is great. It means that there's longevity. And total, our portfolio has raised 1.9 billion euros. So we're really proud of our portfolio and what they've accomplished and how we've helped them do that. Our unique selling point as compared to others is that we have a talent team and an expansion team that we make available to all of our portfolio. So we did a survey of our portfolio and said, okay, what are the few things that you need the most help with that would really help you change your game and take it to the next level? And it's hiring great people and it's expanding to new markets. So we hired 2 experts, a head of talent and head of expansion, and their sort of goal in life is to serve the portfolio companies that you saw on one of the previous slides, where we think that we can add great value and help them take it to the next level. And this is a little bit about the fund that we just closed, where normal ticket size that we usually spend is about
If you hear us once more, it's frozen.
Yes, it is frozen for me too.
Yeah. Let's just wait a bit again. Let's just hope it doesn't continue this, that it doesn't freeze too much. But, technical events cause technical issues sometimes. But let's just see if the internet resumes for Gwen. Okay, once more she dropped out. Just like previously, I'm going to stop the recording because there's really no point in recording this, I guess.
So, super. Let's talk about burn rate then. So, I think the obvious question is, what is burn rate? And here, burn rate, and I think you can look up a bunch of different definitions, but they basically kind of say the same thing. It's the pace at which you spend money. And in most cases, it's referring to venture capital money before reaching profitability. It's often calculated on a specific period of time. So, week, month, quarter, but most generally speaking, by a month. That tends to be sort of the standard time frame that you use. And therefore, a startup that's burning 30,000 a month is therefore spending 30,000 a month. And that includes overhead and variable expenses in that burn rate. There's 2 different definitions of burn rate. So one is the gross burn rate, which is the total amount that a company is spending on operational expenses each month when there's no positive cash flow. So the alternative to that is net burn rate, which is the amount you're spending on operational expenses minus positive cash flow. So for example, let's see, I might have given an example here. No. Let's say that you have a burn rate of 30,000 a month. And let's say that you do have a product and you're selling a little bit of that product, which results in cash of about 10,000. So the net burn rate would be the 30,000 minus 10,000, which is 20,000. Okay, so that's the difference between net burn rate and gross burn rate. Once again, gross being that you don't have any income coming in, or positive income, and net being that you do have positive income and you take it away from your gross burn rate. So now that we've gone through the sort of high level definition, I think the next question that most people, or that I asked myself when I got into my situations and needed to, start digging into this, is why does it matter? And why does it matter to have a pulse on how much money I'm burning through each month? And I would say burn rate, burn rate management is a little bit of an art. There isn't an obvious perfect way of doing it or perfect burn rate for any org. It's dependent upon a bunch of different scenarios and external as well as internal environments. But to kind of set the stage, it's the art of finding the right balance between a sufficient burn rate and an excessive burn rate is kind of where you want to be. And those are two extremes. And it's important for you to find somewhere in the middle that fits your company or your org. And that being said, the middle ground that you find today, probably not, and most likely will not be relevant, in a year. So you do all of this work to find your burn rate, your perfect burn rate now, and you're going to have to keep on redoing that over and over and over again as you grow. It's my understanding that everyone online is kind of at the beginning of their startup career, and where you might have little more than just an idea and some free hours on the side to work on that idea. And this is when your burn rate is sort of unknowable. It's very difficult to calculate, but with no financial assets, the only burn rate that really matters is your rough estimate of how long and how much it will cost you to develop a product or a service. So let's say that you have something that you want to develop and you think that you can have it in a working form in 6 months. You calculate sort of what that time cost is for you over those 6 months, and that would be equivalent to your burn rate in the situation that you're at today. When you start building your company and start thinking about burn rate, it's important to distinguish what type of company you're trying to build. And this is where you need to sort of take a step back and look up and see, where do I want to be? Where does this company want to be 10 years from now? Because if you think that you're going to build a massive company that's going to address the entire, consumer market of the world, and you're eventually going to go towards an IPO, then you need to grow, and you need to grow aggressively and fast. That's one sort of a burn rate that you need to focus on. If you are going to build something specific for a niche in a local region and you're hoping to maybe get it acquired in a few years, that's a completely different sort of burn rate scenario that you'll need to look at. So, what I'm doing now is trying to present a bunch of different scenarios to consider before you sit down and start to assess what sort of burn rate that you want to plan for. The more money that you need to spend to get your product or service out there, the higher your burn rate will be. And the more money you will need to raise from a VC firm, such as InVenture. And as you start on this sort of journey, you really need to understand your unit economics, your cost of growth, to make an informed decision about how much money needs to be raised to cover your burn rate so that you achieve these goals. General rule of thumb is that most companies should raise enough money to last about 12 or 18 months. Once again, rule of thumb. And to be honest with you, in today's market environment, we're recommending to our portfolio companies to have more like 24 months. But every industry scenario company is different. So like I said at the beginning, I'm going to give a sort of generalist view. It might not apply to your specific situation. I mentioned key metrics. So regardless of where you are on your journey, when you start calculating burn rate, you kind of need to take a step back and start thinking about the two most important key metrics, which is cost of growth and unit economics. And these are two super simple. I just threw up some different concepts here that are a part of the cost of growth and unit economics. So cost of growth, so you're renting office space, your employee salaries, what it takes to keep the lights on, benefit packages for your employees, et cetera, et cetera. That number will inevitably grow as you need to hire more people and as your company grows. And then the other one is unit economics, which is, what does your company earn with every sale of your product or service? And unit economics is really a key factor to help you figure out your burn rate. So I'm actually going to take the next few slides. I'm going to take a break from burn rates and dig a little bit into unit economics. Maybe I can just take a pause. Quick show of hands. Is there anyone that's heard of the two concepts of lifetime value and cost of acquisition when it comes to unit economics? Yes, no, yeah, someone? Okay, great. I'm going to go through it for the next 2 or 3 slides or so. So for some of you, it might be a refresher. For others, it will be new. Unit economics, super important. It's basically your lifetime value of a customer minus the cost of acquiring that customer. Lifetime value. And these are definitions, so I am going to go through them in detail just to make sure that we cover everything. It's a metric that indicates the total revenue that a business can expect from a customer throughout the relationship. The longer a customer continues to purchase from you, the greater their lifetime value is. It's something that your customer support team and your, say, customer success team can really influence. So those are two different teams that you might not need at the very beginning, but you'd need later on, who can really help you expand the lifetime of a customer, thereby extending the lifetime value of them. It's also used to make business decisions. So for example, if you use, if you're not sure exactly which customer segment you want to enter into, you could do some calculations on what the potential lifetime values would be of customer group X versus customer group Y. And if one of them has a significantly larger or longer lifetime value, then that may tell you which customer group you want to go for example. On the other side of this equation is the cost of acquisition. So the cost that it takes for your company to attract new customers and continue their growth. It's basically the total sales and marketing cost required to earn the new customer over time, over a specific time period. It's calculated by, and this is where I've had lots of heated discussions over this at different companies. There isn't a certain specific definition. There isn't a right or wrong. You just kind of have to sit down with your team and determine what you think works best for you. But basically, you want to determine a set period of time that you want to measure, be it a day, a week, a month, a quarter, a year. I think most commonly it's 3 months, but you can use whatever time period that you want. And then you add up all the sales and marketing expenses during that period of time. And it's everything from ad spend, salaries of the people on your marketing and sales teams, creative costs, what it costs to publish or produce some of your marketing that you're using to attract new customers. If you are using a CRM, a customer management tool like a HubSpot or something like that, there's technology costs involved. That goes into your cost of acquisition as well. So you take those expenses and you divide it by the total number of customers acquired during that period, and you've got your cost of acquisition. So once you've determined the time period, you've gotten all the costs totaled, and you know the number of customers that you acquired, then it's actually easy calculation to determine. So super important concepts when you're looking at unit economics. And then how do we use this? Well, they're usually used together in the form of a ratio. So what is your, and you hear this all the time in venture lingo, what's your LTV CAC ratio? And you're like, what the hell is an LTV CAC? Okay, it's your lifetime value to customer acquisition ratio. But unfortunately, people, don't necessarily sit down to explain themselves in full, but that's what it is. And super broad terms, for a normal technology company, the ratio that investors are looking for is 3 to 1. So lifetime value of a customer is 3 times, is 4 times actually what it costs for you to acquire that customer. Also, traditionally speaking, companies like it when you recoup the cost of acquiring that customer within a year. But this varies depending on how far along you are on your journey, right? So for example, if your cost of acquisition is if your LTV to CAC ratio is 1 to 1, it means that you're spending just as much money acquiring a customer as it is that they are spending on your products. Which isn't a great place to be, but to be honest with you, it's usually where you are when you get started. If it's higher than that, so like if it's 5 to 1, that means that you might not be spending enough on sales and marketing, and you could be missing out on attracting new leads. So a lot of times I get the question, okay, here's my ratio. Now I've defined my time, I've added everything up, I've found my metrics. It's not great. What can I do to sort of improve some of these costs? We've already gone a little bit into what you could do to improve the lifetime value, but I think one of the key things that you can work with is improving your CAC, the customer acquisition costs, where you can look at your sales pipe and really try to improve your conversion rate. Is there a question? Maybe? No? Okay. For everyone that you reach out to, how many of those actually converted into a sale? So that's a ratio that you can play with a little bit. Adding value. Is there any way that you can give customers more of what's valuable to them and potentially charge more? Is there any way that you could implement a customer referral program, for example, and get good customers to recommend other good customers? Is there any way that you can streamline your sales cycle and make it more efficient? So all of these are kind of tools that you potentially have at your fingertips to improve your cost of acquisition, thereby improving your LTV to CAC ratio. So why is this important? Because it all goes back to your burn rate. And to understand your burn rate and where you're burning cash, it's important to understand those concepts. So this I've touched on a bit, but just to go over the example again, when you're looking at burn rate and trying to figure out how to calculate it, as a reminder, you want to identify how long your company can burn cash before needing to turn a profit, or how long you can burn cash until you need need to raise another round, potentially money from a VC. So if you burn $25,000 per month and have $100,000 left in reserves, then you have about 4 months of runway left, or 4-month burn rate. 4 months left until you burned, all the cash that you have. Most investors, and this is kind of before, they would recommend to have at least 12 months of runway. Now we're facing the sort of macroeconomic challenges that we are. So like I said, now most people are recommending 12 to 18. And we're recommending to our portfolio companies 24. So if your burn rate is about 10,000 euros a month, you want to have at least 120,000 in available cash. And there's different ways to play with that as well. You want to ensure that if there's a temporary market downturn, unexpected expense, one of your customers sort of drops off the face of the earth, that you'll be able to handle that without threatening your business and really making you change your plans. Okay. Any questions as we've gone this far? Any concepts that you need to deep dive into a little bit more, or anything that kind of stands out? No? Okay. So where I think it gets a little bit tricky is there's this span of how much cash you should be burning. And there's the low end of it, of the span of the spectrum, and then there's the high end. We have, in my opinion, and I think it's sort of general consensus, just come out of a market where high burn rate was encouraged. And there was so much money in the market, and venture capital companies and my peers really were just sort of like jumping over each other to spend more money and to invest in companies. And venture capital companies were encouraging their portfolio companies to spend more and have a higher burn. One of the reasons for that is if you have a high burn, then there is the assumption that you would have very high growth. If you have very high growth, then in the past 2 years in the market cycle that we're kind of feeling the backside of now, it meant that you could oftentimes get a higher valuation. And so they're putting more cash into companies, getting them to burn more money, getting them to a higher valuation so that they could raise money again, which one could argue inaccurately inflated a lot of portfolios. So that's the system that we're kind of coming off of. All of a sudden that's kind of crashing and everyone's going, wait. You can't just grow at any cost and you can't have uncontrollable burn rate. Now you need to have efficient burn rate. There's pros and cons to that, okay? So a couple of rules of thumbs when determining where you should be on the burn rate spectrum, on the span. So let's assume that you are leaning towards a high burn rate, or you think that that's where you need to be. So why would you do that? Well, you need to be spending a lot of money. That is to say, you need to be burning a lot of money to justify asking for a lot of money. So let's say that you go to a VC firm and say, we want, 5 million euros. The first question you're going to get is, what are you going to spend it on? And you need to have a plan for how you're going to burn that and how you're going to spend that, preferably in a very efficient, effective way, where you can also do a very good, business case of what that's going to result in the terms of growth. You're not just burning for the sake of burning. But like I said, we're coming off of the past couple of years where that wasn't looked at so much. And likewise, a high burn rate could indicate that you're ready for a higher valuation. So there's a lot of reasons that venture capital companies really like portfolio companies with a high burn rate. You need to focus on optimizing your burn rate appropriately while spending thoughtfully and strategically, which goes back to the LTV CAC ratio that I talked about. So at the end of the day, when you talk about how much money you plan to burn, talk about where your expenses are, and what that's going to result in, any VC worth their salt at the other side of the table is going to bring you back to the LTV CAC and ask you to walk them through that and why that matters and how you've calculated that, and to be able to confidently, with credibility, feel like what levers you need to pull and push and project what sort of result that will get you. So one of the backsides of this is if you go out there and say, we're going to burn this money, we're going to grow really fast, we're going to get this valuation, we're running all cylinders full speed ahead. Let's say that something happens. And let's say that you get into a certain situation where, for whatever reason, one of your markets isn't delivering the way it should, or isn't working out the way it should. And you need to decrease your burn rate to sort of figure out where you need to go next. Investors don't really like that. They don't like a decrease in burn rate, because from their point of view, it means that you're stalling all of a sudden. You were growing, now you're not growing. And here in the VC world, we like growth. They are investing in you to accelerate your growth, and they want to ensure that you're optimizing the money in the bank. cutting back or stalling growth needs to be articulated carefully. So in the example that I gave about, maybe there's a certain country or market that you've expanded into that isn't working out. There's nothing wrong with stalling growth as long as you've got a good business case for it. Hey, we're pulling back on Germany, for example. It hasn't turned out the way we wanted to. The projected, LTV CAC ratio isn't what we thought it was going to be. We need to reassess, and we need to then spend money in a different area. That's acceptable. But just, not spending money for the sake of not spending money can be seen as unwillingness to take calculated risks, and that's no good, as perceived by the VC world. It looks like, do we have a question in the chat? Yeah. How do you measure effectiveness to be able to stop burning in time or to reconsider strategy? I'm not sure that I fully, or how do you know when to stop burning in time? And I think that's the question. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I think if you go back to your unit economics, which hopefully you have some form of a dashboard or something where you can follow that each and every day or week or month or whatever that would be, you'll start to see that ratio slide in one direction or the other. And you see that ratio slide, meaning that, okay, it's costing you more to acquire a customer, or the customers that you're acquiring aren't spending as much. That is an early signal of something's going wrong, and an early signal that you might start to burn more than you're spend more than you're getting in. So that's why those unit economics are so key to keep a pulse on, because that will be your early signal to the fact that something might be going wrong. I hope that answered the question. If not, feel free to speak up. Okay, I think we're good then. So at the other end of the spectrum today, and in my opinion, for the next 2 years at least, sort of regardless of which vertical or industry you're in, measured growth is being rewarded over growth at all costs. So an example of a company, and there's tons of examples, but the one that comes to my mind first, of a company that grew at all costs, it's a lot of these quick food delivery companies like the Gorillas, for example. I think it's a German-based, quick food delivery company, where they went from being founded to being a unicorn in less than 12 months, in the span of a year, something like that. I mean, it was some ridiculous time, which is super fast growth. They were raising money, they were spending that money as fast as they could, and they were growing. Now, they weren't profitable. They weren't anywhere near profit, because that's not what was being required of them. It was just to grow at all costs. Quick market downturn, money's being pulled back. Guess who's sitting there holding the big hot potato? They are. And you really have to go back to your unit economics. Okay, how much does it cost to acquire a new customer? And what's the lifetime value of that customer? And that's where you see a lot of these companies going bust nowadays, because they weren't founded or built in any way, shape, and form to be able to sustain measured, efficient growth. They were growing for the sake of growing. We will continue to see the fallout of that over the next few months, potentially over the next year and a half, I think. So there isn't a company that I meet today where we don't sit down and talk about their unit economics and LTV to CAC ratio. As a general rule, startups in your phase, where you're really just starting off, should keep expenses as low as possible. If there are certain strategic reasons to start burning at a faster rate, be it I see where we can acquire this company and gain market share, or I see a region that's been untapped, or I see how we can quickly win customers in an efficient way, that's something different. That's, an opportunity cost that you evaluate when that comes up. But everyday spending on operational expenses should be kind of as low as possible when you're just getting started. An example from my most recent company that I work for, Tink. When we got started, and the CEO of Tink, Daniel Shilian, he tells this story all the time, where he'll kick off a presentation, talking about the early days, where he shows one of these egg cookers. Because the only thing we really had in the kitchen when we got started was coffee and egg cookers and a bunch of eggs, because eggs are super efficient food. Lots of protein. They can keep you going for a really long time, and they're cheap. And if you get the egg cooker, you can cook a lot of eggs super fast for a lot of people. And that's his way to illustrate the, scrappiness that the team was on for the good, first 2 or 3 years, keeping the expenses as low as possible, to increase the run rate and really try to achieve something before we needed to start spending money. It's different for every business. It's going to be completely different for a like a pharma startup or a deep tech startup than it is a tech startup. So once again, the examples that I'm giving you are for oftentimes pure technology SaaS companies. Might not be the area that you're in, but generally you want to keep expenses as low as possible. Managing burn rate early on is a great way to give yourself options. And rule of thumb that I tell everyone, you want options on the table. You never want to be in a situation where all of a sudden you've realized that you've burned too much money and you've got 3-month runway and, holy shit, you need money in the bank. That's when you start making bad deals. That's when you start making bad deals that potentially mess up your cap table, which means that you don't own as much of your company as you did before, which is not a situation that you want to get into. Or you're forced to take in money from, debt when you really wanted venture, or venture when you really wanted debt. None of that is a good place to be. You always want to have options, and the best way to keep your options open is to manage your burn rate early on. It's also a great habit to get into. You really want to work on building a culture that is cost conscious. 29% of startups fail because they run out of money, according to CB Insights, and it's the second most cited reason behind lack of product market fit. So, burn rate, something to have control over. Okay. Why does any of this matter? It's tough to project what's going to happen in 10 years or see the light at the end of the tunnel. When I first kicked off this presentation, I talked a lot about, or I mentioned where you want to head with your startup. Are we going for, total customer domination and a potential IPO, or are we going for a niche segment where you just want to, but where you want to be acquired by someone else? There's no right, there's no wrong, but you always need to have that end goal in mind so that you don't end up headed in the wrong direction where you can't backtrack from. So when we're out talking to startups and talking to founders, we really like the founders who can give me sort of the, the 10,000 foot perspective, as well as get down and dirty into the trenches. The trenches being knowing their unit economics, their LTV to CAC ratio, and then being able to sit back and have a conversation of where the company will be in 10 years, be it an IPO, be it an acquisition, what the market looks like. You need to be able to transition back and forth kind of constantly. One of the best growth investors, and by growth investor, I mean an investor that comes in a lot later in a life cycle, is one called Iconic. They're fantastic. And they come out with this annual evaluation of the best SaaS companies, B2B SaaS companies. They have certain metrics that they think are super important, and they talk about which companies are performing at which metrics and where you need to be in certain percentiles in certain areas of growth, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a great information to have when you're getting started, because it helps you and it kind of forces you to take that 10,000 foot perspective to have an idea of where you need to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is, that you're working towards. One of the things that they talk about a lot right now is resilience framework. Once again, in this downturn, and like being able to say, okay, what sort of metrics do our growth companies need to have for us to declare them healthy? And these are just some of the metrics that they look at on their health scale. So healthy being they've reached more than 90% of this metric, less healthy being that they're under 80% of this metric. For example, for the top line attainment, so net new ARR, meaning the net new annual recurring revenue that they would get. That's one of the metrics that they look at. Another metric, we talked about runway earlier, is runway. They like to have companies that have over 2 years of a runway, going back to the burn rate. A less healthy score is a company that has less of a year burn rate, okay? So if we take this, and this is just one venture capital company's framework and one view on it. This doesn't have to be, this isn't sort of set in stone, this is just their view. And when you're thinking about fundraising, you want to have as many perspectives as possible to make sure that when you go out there, that you're somewhere close to what the external market is expecting, right? So it's good to have some of these frameworks top of mind so that you kind of know where you fall. But if we were to expand on that a little bit more, and granted, the majority of this is extremely farther on for you are right now, but it's still good to have in mind. So for example, year over year annual recurring revenue growth for early stage company, they're really looking at companies that can grow by, here it says 430% year over year. Now keep in mind, this is top quartile performance, okay? Just good to keep in mind to see where these companies are at, and then where you sort of fall into that. And then they break it down even more, net dollar retention, annual recurring revenue per full-time employee, et cetera, et cetera. But my point with this is, it's good to have these larger, longer-term metrics in mind and have that view. So when you're nitty-gritty down in the details, you want to make sure that the decisions that you're making will set you on the right trajectory based on where you want to go. Okay? This is just one opinion. There's a bunch of different opinions out there. And I think the key takeaways of all of this is that, number one, as a startup, you need to spend a lot of cash to push yourself towards success. So your goal is not as simple as just reducing burn rate. You need to think of that spectrum on the low burn rate versus high burn rate and figure out where your situation is today, whether you should be on the low end or the high end, whether or not your unit economics enable you to be on the high end, whether or not you think that there's a strategic reason that you need to grow fast because, maybe the time is now and it's a winner takes all market. Such it was, that's the way it was with my experience with Tink. As we were selling to financial institutions in Europe, we knew that the company who signs the most logos will be the one to win. And so we had a super high burn. Back to my egg story at the beginning, super low burn, try to make things last as long as possible. Once we found product market fit, got in a lot of financing from VC companies, then we knew we've got to run fast because it's a race against time and a race against competition. So then we really started burning a lot to be able to acquire those logos. So same company, just different period of time and different strategies. Understanding your unit economics and your cost of growth, and then aim for at least 12 months of runway. And like I said, this is changing a little bit now. I think most VCs would recommend 18, and in some cases 24, depending on where you are in your growth cycle and what industry and vertical you're in. Expect your expenses to change over time and forecast accordingly. For most of the companies that I speak to, let's say like 99.9% of them, talent is what companies spend the most money on. So acquiring people. Oftentimes it's a catch-22 where you want to grow, but you need, for example, a new salesperson to be able to ensure that growth. And then you need that new salesperson to bring in new logos, to bring in new revenue so that you can get a higher valuation, so you can get in more money, so you can hire the next salesperson. And so it's just it's a big cycle. And at some point you kind of need to put your foot down and determine what point in the cycle you're going to kick things off. It's the common, what is it? The chicken, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? There's no right or wrong answer. You kind of just have to figure that out, what works best for your company at that point in time. But talent oftentimes significantly impacts the cost of growth. And then last but not least, knowing the nuances of your burn rate can make or break your next funding round. So when it comes to startup, to the startup world, where earlier the thought was cash is king, that only goes so far now. We're coming off of the past 2 years where companies were growing at all costs. I gave you the example of the Gorillas company and always raising tons of cash because you could find a way to spend it. Those days are over. You need to have cash, but you need to make sure that it's spent in an efficient way where you know what you're spending it on and you know what the results will be based on that spend. You need to be strategic about your burn rate and understand why you're spending what you're spending, and recognize that that's not always super easy to figure out. So I would claim that a lot of time and resources and thought needs to go into that. And inevitably you'll be testing a lot as well. You'll try something out with a certain customer group and it might work, it might not work. So it's all about, trial and error. And we are firm believers that trial and error and failure is just fine. I oftentimes meet companies who are afraid to tell me what the LTV to CAC ratio is, or before they even show the slide, they try to compensate for it or explain that, it's not great and they're sorry, but there's no apologies whatsoever. A less than, great ratio is fine as long as you know what triggers to pull and what the result will be. We tested customer segment A, we were expecting B, it didn't work out. So now we're moving on to C, and here's what we expect to come from that. As long as you know why things ended up the way they did, that's fine. You never need to sort of apologize or cover up or be embarrassed of a certain ratio. I find that in today's world that the founders that I really like are the ones that know why their ratio is what it is, regardless of whether or not it's bad or good. I see that we have a question here. Which I don't.
It seems it's not finished.
No, okay. Okay. And I've also included some resources here, some links that I find helpful when talking to founders about this, which I thought I'd share with you as well. Hopefully that you would find helpful too. And that's it for the content of tonight's talk. Happy to open up to any questions if you might have some.
Perfect. Thank you so much. There is actually a question now. First, I just wanted to ask Solomon, it's possible you did press enter too early. Maybe you can ask the question out loud. Oh, okay. It just he just posted it there. Should I read it?
Here we go. I've got it up now. The early stage investors take responsibilities for next stages to find the funds to increase the startups fund while the current funds of startups run away. How do they share the responsibility for next rounds? Okay, so I think what you're asking is the early stage investors take responsibility for helping a startup raise the next round and find the next round of funds. Let me know if I'm incorrect, but I think that's what you're asking. And yeah,
It is.
yeah.
You
Okay.
are right.
So that's something that is super important to us at InVenture. 2 points that I want to make on that. Number one, in today's climate, we will not invest in a company where we don't think we can help land the follow-up investment. So if we think that, yes, we like this company, but it's in a certain area or region, or even though we want to do the deal, the cap table is messy so that we wouldn't be able to help them raise a successful second round, then we won't do the deal. My second point is that it's sort of a precursor to the first point, and that is we're super involved. And we definitely help all of our companies. And I think that's one of the biggest value adds that one could provide. I've been reading all of these articles with graphs and analyses done where they go to founders and say, okay, what do venture capitalists actually provide value? And where can they provide the most value? And other than the talent and the expansion, it is landing introductions to other VCs so that I can raise my next round and helping me with my next round. So yes, the good ones take responsibility for it. And that's something that you should sort of validate and really double click on when you are choosing who you want to invest in your company, making sure that there's someone standing beside you, working for you as well. Other questions?
There is one above that one from Sergey and Elena. What about B2B sector? Does LTV, CAC work in the same way?
Absolutely. It does. It's probably, I would argue that it's a little bit more difficult to calculate because there's so many other factors involved, but it does absolutely work in the same way, and you still have to figure it out. And I mean, I could go into the nuances of them separately, but then you get into sort of vertical specific nuances. From my experience at Tink, where we were selling to the financial sector, our sales cycles would easily be 12 to 18 months. And so, the costs for landing a certain customer were very, very, very high. What did that tell us? It told us that when we finally got around to the point of putting a price on the table, that price was also very, very high because it had to carry the costs of the years-long work that we had just done, to get us to this point. And back to my experiences at Tink, there was a lot of other competitors. And the one thing that set Tink apart from the others, and that made Tink the success story, because inevitably the others have gotten purchased for a fraction of the amount, or they're still out there struggling on their own and really suffering. It was that they didn't charge enough money. They didn't realize the fact that, if I'm going to have a sales team of 5 people working for 12 months to land this customer, I need to charge at least 1 to 2 million euros for this contract. That they didn't do that calculation. We did, and that was what enabled us to build a sustainable growth business. That calculation is specific to that market, that time frame. Okay, so what would be the best approach for startups to have early stage investors to choose? Should you choose multiple investors or 1 to 2 investors? The choice is yours. I can give you an example from a company that I won't name, but I think that they did a really fantastic job of building their cap table and choosing their investors. They started off with, and this is a company in the fintech space who's brand new. let's say that they kicked things off in March of this year. So, I mean, super new company. They had their product. They tested product market fit with one company. They were able to sort of fund that themselves. And when they realized, okay, we have something that works, we need to expand it, they were extremely diligent and laser focused on who is the perfect customer. Another term that you hear a lot is ICP, ideal customer profile. Who is our ideal customer profile for this product? They identified 10. It's this one in Germany, it's this one in the Netherlands, it's this one in Spain, it's this one in France, for example. And I said, okay, they went into LinkedIn, said, who knows the founders of these companies? They made a little bit of a map and said, okay, this VC firm or this angel investor can open the door to the company number one that I know will be a perfect customer. And they did it that way. And so when they went out to fundraise, they knew exactly who they wanted to invest in them. And they were able to say exactly why and what they would get out of it. And you know what? That ended up being a massive battle between venture capital companies. Everyone wanted to invest in this company. And if you weren't on their list, if you couldn't open the door at one of these 10 companies that they knew that they needed to land, then they wouldn't take your investments. So I think that's a brilliant way to do it. You don't always have that option where you can pick and choose, but it is a good idea to have an idea of what would make the perfect round for you and articulate that. I mean, companies want to see that you know where you're headed and why you're headed there. And you know what, in 12 months, you might be wrong. That's fine. That's sort of, that doesn't matter as much as having a solid idea and a plan on how you're going to deliver on that idea.
Perfect. Thank you. So far, I see no more questions. So if anybody's willing, you can also, ask questions verbally. Raise the virtual hand or the actual hand as well. I'm going to quickly add myself to the spotlight so you're not there alone. Yeah, currently I see no more questions as of right now. Let's give it a couple more seconds. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, I can say a really huge thanks already for being here this evening, sharing your experience with us. Mm-hmm. I will certainly forward the presentation later to the participants so they can make use of the links you added to the very end of it.
Yeah, of course. And like you said, I'll be available to take a couple of chats later on. But I get that it's new terms, it's new concepts, it's new acronyms. It's a lot to get your head around. So I find that it's helpful to take some of this stuff, let it land a bit, do your own research and exploring. And then when you're sitting there in your Excel spreadsheet trying to figure out your unit economics, then you're like, oh, I've got a question.
Yeah, in that sense, I guess it would be better to have the calls maybe also a bit later, not per se this week, but yeah, as Gwen just mentioned, she will be holding a couple of one-on-ones with you. So I will share the link later on and on Slack, and do not miss the opportunity. Yes, I see there might be a question from Solomon.
I wrote. It is better.
Ah, yeah, he wrote one. So what would be first approach for a startup to knock the door of investors to get their attention?
Yeah, okay. I get that a lot. There's no right way or wrong way. I meet startups at, say, incubators, at sort of pitch competitions and stuff, forums similar to this. I get cold emails as well. If you're going to do a cold outreach, my tip is to be super specific on exactly why you want to talk to that VC. Try to make a connection that usually works. I get a lot of cold inbounds from companies who are, say, in the UK or something, and that I find that a little bit disappointing because it clearly states on our website where we can and can't invest, and it means that like you haven't even been to our website. That's not a great first impression. So I would do a little bit of research. It doesn't need to be more than 15 minutes. But email, LinkedIn, doesn't work that well. It tends to get kind of crowded. events work as well. I mean, I think the best is probably a warm intro, where you know exactly who you want to talk to, and you can try to backtrack and find someone who can make that intro for you.
Thank you a lot.
Of course.
Okay, I see there are no more questions. And in that case, really, once more, a huge thanks to you, Gwen, for being here this evening, for sharing your experience and knowledge, and yeah, spending the time here, even though it's there's a lot of snow outside and you need to get home as well. But yeah, so once more, thank you so much for joining in this evening.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Good luck.
Thank you. And of course, thanks to everyone else for the attendees, the participants, for joining in during this live session. If you're watching in the recording, also thank you for tuning in, so to say. As I mentioned previously at a pause we had, then next week we are going to be talking about the legal aspects, like agreements and intellectual property and so on and so forth. And the speakers did ask for you to prepare any and send in any questions you may have so that they can prepare better. So if you have any questions about these topics, please do send a direct message to me on Slack or via email, and I will forward it to the speakers so that they can already prepare the speech better for next week. Apart from that, as I also mentioned, I did share the guidelines initially at the very beginning on Slack and in the first email, I think, where you can, through the guidelines, you will be able to find the pitch competition criteria. But I also promised that I would share it once again, and I will do that, I guess, tomorrow when I share the recording of this session on Slack. So together with the recording, I will also share the guidelines for the pitch competition, the evaluation criteria, sorry. So, yeah, I guess those are the main things. Next week, legal aspects. If you have any questions regarding those topics, please do send them in. Apart from that, thank you for joining in. Have a wonderful evening, and well, see you next week. Bye.